Hi, everyone. I'm Jason Specklin, a cloud solution architect at Microsoft, and this is today's Azure Dev Tip. In today's tip, we're going to be migrating an Azure DevOps pipeline from a classic pipeline to pipeline as code with the brand new manual approvals for YAML pipelines, now in general availability. So let's take a look at our existing classic pipeline. So that pipeline is going to be divided into two stages. It's going to have my build and my release. So let me look at my build. We're just building an ASP.NET Core web application on Windows 2019. And here's our release pipeline. Now, this one is actually also pretty standard. What we're doing is we're getting that artifact, there we go, that artifact from our build pipeline. We're first deploying it to our dev environment, and then we're deploying it to our production environment. And if we dig in here, we'll just see that we're deploying to Azure App Service. Again, nothing particularly exciting, but the thing that we want to talk about, the point of this whole exercise, is right here. So this pre-deployment approval in our production pipeline. And another thing to take a look at, we'll need to worry about when we make this a YAML pipeline, we have these variables. And these variables vary between our dev environment and our production environment. So let me go to pipelines and take another look at that build stage. And if we click right here on Agent Job 1, we'll see this little View YAML button, which looks like exactly what we need. So let's click on that. And what pops up is this really ugly, already highlighted thing filled with errors. It looks really intimidating. I am not a fan of this message, but we can actually fix all the things that are in here pretty quickly. Let me paste that code that we just copied into here. And here we have, again, all these error messages here. But first off, we can see that they're kind of repeated twice. We have this, your build pipeline references an undefined variable named parameters.restore build objects. So we see that that is referred to in these projects inputs to these YAML tasks. And as it turns out, we don't actually need this value here at all. The project's input is for when we have several different projects, but we only want to build one or some of them with a path selector. So we can actually take that right out and don't have to worry about it anymore. Cool. We are halfway there. Next thing is our pipeline references the build configuration variable. So we do need to set that. So let us create variables here for our pipeline. And I do want one called build configuration. And the one I want is called release. Because I do want a release build, not a dev build, because this is actually going to go through our pipeline and eventually end up in production. So I don't want a debug build inside there. So that actually takes care of all that we need. Cool. Except this pool name, Azure Pipelines, not quite what I want. I do want to specify the deployment pool that I want to use. So I want to use the VM image, and I want to use just what I was using before in my pipeline, Windows 2019. Okay, and one more thing that I want to do, just like in my original build pipeline, I do want to make sure that this is triggered every time someone commits to the master branch. So let's do that. Trigger, and we will say -master. And there we go. Our code has been synced to master. So let us go back to Azure DevOps and take a look at these pipelines here. And we don't actually have a new pipeline running. And that makes sense. We haven't set up this Azure-pipelines.yaml file to run inside of Azure DevOps yet. We actually need to tell that to happen. But the way we can do that's pretty easy. We just go to New Pipeline. And it's going to ask us where our code is. And in our particular instance, I've put my code in GitHub, so it's easier for you to see when this video is done. And yeah, here's our Azure DevOps pipeline approval demo. And what it's actually going to do, it's going to look at the code. And if there wasn't already a YAML file there, what it would do is to kind of suggest a Bootstrap YAML file to use. But there already is the YAML file we just created. So it's going to say, hey, do you want to use this? And I say, yes, I do want to use that. That is exactly what I wanted. So I'm going to say run. So let's take a look at how this is coming along. All right, it's running our job. That looks good. Now, thanks to the magic of video, time has gone by really quickly for you. Not at all quickly for me, but we can now take a look at what the results of that build was. So if we go to our recently run pipelines, it shows our old one, it shows our new one. Let's take a look at our new one. We can look at how it ran. We can see all the commits that are associated with it. We can click on the job, get more information on the job. Cool, we've got our build pipeline converted to YAML. Now, onto the release part of the pipeline. So looking at our release pipeline right here, let's first look at our dev stage. We'll worry about prod in a minute. Let's select our app service deploy task. And right here, once again, we have that view YAML button. So let's click on that. And once again, we get something that looks kind of messy and error-filled. But don't panic, we can still work with this. So I'm going to copy to the clipboard. And I'm going to stick that at the end of my YAML file. Now, you see, once again, we have steps and a task. And what we could do is just take this task and stick it on the end of our current build pipeline, and that would work. But we might have an issue where if we have a problem with deployment, then that will fail our build. And that's not quite what we want. What we actually want to do is create different stages, a multi-stage pipeline. So the first stage can be our build, and the second our deployment. So let's set that up. The first thing I'm going to do is here at this top level, I'm going to say I'm going to have some stages. And I'm going to say my first stage, and I'm going to call it build. And every stage has one or more jobs. And my first job is going to be this build job. And every job has one or more steps. So I already have those, so that's perfect. Let me just indent those a little bit. And then we are good to go. So now we have our build stage ready. So what we need to do is we need to convert this into our deploy stage. So we're going to have another stage. And this is going to be called deploy. And every stage, once again, has one or more jobs. And now I'm actually, rather than using a job, I'm going to use a special kind of job called a deployment job. So let me put that in deployment. Okay. Now, one of the important things about these deployment jobs is that they can have environments. And the environments, as we'll see in a little bit, is what's going to enable us to do that manual approval later. But for now, let me just put environment, and I'm going to call it dev. Now, I can put variables into my jobs. I can scope them there. And this is curious. We got this YAML from our dev stage, but it gave us the environment variables from production. Not quite what we want, but something that is easily fixed. So let me copy that into here, and that's going to be at this level. And I don't want this to be production. I want this to be development, and I want this to be my dev value. There we go. All right, so let's take a look at what's missing over here. So I'm going to need the connected service name. Okay, that's the service connection that connects to my Azure account. And since we already had a working pipeline, we already have a service connection we can use. So let's take a look right here, and really just this name right here is all we need. So I am going to copy that, and I am going to paste it into a variable. And I can put this variable up here so we can use it in a bunch of different stages. Now I'm going to say service connection, and I'm just going to pop that right in there. And now we can use the service connection variable. Done. Excellent. All right, so the next thing we need is app type. Okay, now for that one, we're actually going to have to take a look at the documentation to see what we can put in there. And here we see the app type. We have a bunch of things. We can deploy function apps, web apps and containers, mobile apps, API apps, all kinds of stuff. But the thing we actually want is a web app on Windows, so just simply web app. Cool. That's easy. So make that web app. Excellent. The web app name, that actually comes from the name of our application. And no need to open a different window. That's actually right here in our pipeline. So pipelines approval demo-dev. What an appropriate name I gave it. Let's just plug that in there. All right, so now we've filled in all of the blanks for these steps. We need to put these steps into this job, into this deployment job. Now, deployment jobs don't just have steps. They have what's called a strategy. So let us put in our deployment strategy. All right, so I'm going to say strategy. I'll put that in there. And the strategy I'm going to use is run once. Now, there are a couple of different choices I have for strategies, but they don't actually pertain to web apps, which is what I'm using for this example. Another strategy I could use is, for example, a canary strategy, and that would work in a Kubernetes cluster, but again, not relevant to web apps. All right, so I'm going to say deploy. Now, I actually under the run once, I can plug into different events here. So I can do a pre-deployment event and do some stuff before I deploy, or post-deployment, and I can do things either on success or on failure. But I'm going to keep this simple. We're just going to deploy. And after deploy, we just need steps, and we have steps. That's exactly what we got. So let me copy that there, and let me paste it in place, and I'm going to have to, everything's going to get indented in because of YAML. Okay. There we go. Good to go. Okay. So one more thing we're actually going to have to do. We're almost there. We're almost there. Now, the eagle-eyed among you who kind of already know how this works might have said, oh, wait a minute. You have this publish build artifacts tasks, great, but you don't have any download artifacts tasks. How are you going to deal with the artifact here? Well, actually, when we use this deployment job, it's automatically going to download all of our artifacts for us. How convenient is that? But we do need to kind of tell this where it's going to put those, because it doesn't put those in the default place. So we need to say package, because that's the package we want to deploy. And we're going to look in the pipeline.workspace, because that is where the automatic download is going to download stuff too. So we're going to look in the pipeline workspace, ****.zip. Okay, there we go. Build is done, our deploy is done. We can see it split nicely into 2 stages right here. We can take a look at our pipeline, see our recent pipeline run, see that it was deployed to 2 separate stages, and we can even take a look at either of those stages. So now we've got the dev part done. It's time to go to production. But before we do that, let's take a look at the Environments tab right here in Azure DevOps. Now we can see that a dev environment was created for us. That happened automatically because we specified an environment called dev in our YAML file. But before we do that in production, I think I want to do that manually so we can set up those approvals that we were talking about earlier. So let me create a new environment. I'm going to call it prod. And there's resources that you can add for Kubernetes or virtual machines so you can kind of see the state of the resource in Azure DevOps. And that's really neat, except this is just an ordinary web app, so we can't do any of that here. But what we can do is we can add approvals and checks. So I'm going to add an approval, and it's going to be me. There we go. And instructions, please approve this, won't you? Sounds good to me. And now we have an approval on that environment. So before anything gets deployed to that environment, that approval must happen. So let's go back to our YAML file, and we should just be able to copy and paste this deployment and just change the dev values to prod values. So let's try that now. All right. Let's properly indent that because that got us before. All right. I think that's okay. All right. So we probably need to scooch that over a touch. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. Oh, no one more. That's more like it. Okay, great. So deploy web app, there we go, to prod, there we go, to production. The environment is going to be the environment name that I just created. That's prod. My variable is going to be prod value. My environment name is going to be production, more of the same, more of the same. My web app name will be pipelines approval demo dash prod. All right. And let's see, then the rest should all be good to go. Here's my pipeline. Oh, error right away. Let's see what my error was. Deploy job as an invalid name. Uh-oh. Aha. Okay. So names have to be valid. You can't have spaces in names, but you can have them in display names. Okay. Easily fixed. And how we doing? Any mistakes? Nope. Running all good. Okay. So here comes the build part. And that's going to take a little while. Here you see the display names of that deploy jobs. There we go. All right. Here we go. Okay, so our build is done, and that's great, but it appears that our deployment job is pending. And it says one approval needs your review before this run can continue to deploy. And that's kind of what I wanted, but not really. See, it's asking for my review before it even deployed to dev. So that's actually not what I want. I mean, the approval looks like it's working fine. Please approve this, won't you? Except it's happening before my dev deployment. So what's happening is the entire stage depends upon that approval in production. So what I need to do next is make the deployment to production its own deployment stage so that the approvals work on the stage level. Let's see if we can do that. Let us open up our YAML file once again, and what we need is a new stage. So I'm going to call this stage dev deploy, and the display name is going to be deploy to dev environment. Okay, and this is going to be, I'll call this deployment deploy web app, and I will call it dev, and deploy web application to dev is what I wanted to display. Okay, so we take all that, and we want to actually have all those stagey things up here. So let's come back here. and paste that atop here. And there we go. Let's eliminate our white space here. And I'm going to call this prod deploy. And this is deploying to the production environment. And there we go. Everything else should be fine. Deploy web application to production, prod. Okay. So by creating another stage, we have made this so that the approvals will only apply to this stage. Let's see if that worked. And we committed, and let's see if that's running. Okay, our pipeline is running, and when we click on it, we can see 3 bubbles indicating that there are 3 stages to this pipeline rather than 2. So that looks good. Here we have that display name that we wanted, deploy to dev, and here we have deploy to production. That looks excellent. Now we just have to wait for the build to go to see if it deploys to dev automatically, but waits for approval upon production. And there we have it. Our deployment to dev happened automatically, which is exactly what we wanted, and our deployment to production is waiting for our review. So I'm going to review it, and I'm going to say yes, because I think I'm a pretty great developer, and so my deployment will now go to production. And that is how you migrate a classic pipeline to a new YAML pipeline with manual approvals. I hope you've enjoyed today's Azure Dev Tip. Thank you so much, and happy coding.